The orange cone snapped in front of my bumper, and the booth speaker spat random check like a verdict, while a young attendant in a crisp polo, eyes sliding past me to soothe the impatient luxury SUVs, raised his pen as if it were a scepter. Under the buzzing fluorescents, my decal glowed on the glass. The red digits of the gate clock bled seconds. Hot asphalt stung the air, and my granddaughter's small phone lens trembled beside the blue folder I've learned to carry when rooms decide I must explain myself. He waved me toward the inspection bay with a careless flick meant for crowds, not people. But the moment they tried to turn my page space into a test, I began a quiet count of facts and frames, and before this night is done, the same screens that held me will have to hold the truth. One request before the next scene: subscribe, comment where you're watching, and share this story. Light spreads when we pass it on. The gate attendant lifted his palm and angled a plastic cone toward my bumper, and the words "random checks" slid out of the speaker like a stamp on my forehead. I was rolling toward the short lane that feeds my numbered space along the east wall, the one I pay for every month, when the cone cut the air and the brake pedal bit under my foot. Behind me, a line of cars gave those little impatient horn taps that pretend to be polite. The booth's fluorescent light buzzed over the glass. I smelt hot asphalt, brake pad dust, and the faint sweetness of someone's car air freshener drifting from the sedan behind me. On the counter in the booth, two monitors showed the split screens from the cameras. I could see my car 2 times at once, a clean sedan in the upper right and the tight shot of my hood in the lower left. The gate attendant, a young man with a crisp polo and a heavy keyring, leaned forward as if my decal needed a sermon to be read. He didn't make eye contact. He tapped the glass with a cap pen, close to where my parking decal clung to the windshield. His radio hissed with someone else's breath. I felt the old hush in my chest, the kind that arises when a room decides you have to explain yourself. The hush has weight, like a hand, and it presses the air right out of you. I reached with 2 fingers to the glove compartment. The latch clicked, a small clean sound, and the blue folder slid forward against my palm. The folder smells like paper and envelope glue. I keep it there because paper speaks in the language this place respects. Letters with dates, receipts with numbers, directives with clauses that don't blink or look away. My granddaughter Maya sat beside me, her backpack at her feet and her hair pulled into a neat bun she did herself. She looked from me to the attendant, then to the clock on the totem by the lane, the red digits ticking the seconds. She didn't say anything. Her phone came up in both hands the way a person holds a candle. The camera made that tiny focusing buzz, and then the shutter noise, soft and dry. She took a picture of the decal, then the totem clock in the same frame, then the booth monitors. She has my late wife's habit of gathering facts before feelings. The attendant spoke through the small grill, and the speaker rounded his words until they lost their corners. He said, "Sir, we're doing a random check on decals and vehicle registration." He said it to the grill more than to me. Behind us, a delivery van idled and coughed. Someone in a crossover laughed at something on their dash. Someone else rolled their window down, and I caught a string of aftershave and a hint of coffee. I rested the folder on my lap, opened the first flap, and slid out the envelope with the HOA logo and my unit number printed clean at the top. Under it, the copy of the parking guidelines I keep highlighted for nights like this, nights loud with small horns and cold lights. My thumb found the clause I know by heart, the one that calls the decal an active credential when affixed and unexpired. I didn't read it out loud. I've learned not to read the men who haven't chosen to listen yet. Instead, I held the page so the words existed in the air with us, like another witness at the curb.
The attendant leaned closer to the glass and peered at the lower left monitor where my hood sat under a cone of light. He pressed a button that put a yellow box around a part of the screen where my decal glowed pale. He didn't say anything for a long moment. He put the pen down carefully, as if pens made noise you could weigh. Then he reached for the phone with the coiled cord and pressed a single button. The line clicked and hummed. I saw my reflection in the glass, an older man with a cap, shoulders square, folder balanced, eyes calm, because calm is a tool. The intercom crackled with a voice I recognized as administrative, the tone that comes from a hallway with carpet and framed notices. The attendant used the same words again, a script he could hide inside. Random check, verification, additional step. He glanced at the line behind me and the way the cars angled out into the street like a short tail. He apologized to the line, not to me, with a small wave. The apology wasn't for what was happening. It was for how long they had to watch. Maya adjusted her seatbelt and looked at me. I could feel her question resting in the space between us. I told her with a nod that we do this with our hands open and our backs straight. She lowered the phone for a second and took a slow breath. She was born into a world where every phone is a small archive. I was born into a world where you learn the quiet names of the people who print the rules and the quiet doors where they meet. Between us, we have a fighting chance. On the other monitor, I watched a tiny version of myself angle forward and stop. The camera at the portico showed the shadows of the palms moving across the sidewalk. The attendant wrote something on a small logbook, his nib pressing like he was dotting I's that could later be counted. He said, "Sir, I need you to pull to the right into the inspection bay by the office." The words inspection bay sounded like a place where they evaluate aircraft, not old men going home. I could taste metal. It's a thing my mouth does under certain lights. I signaled and rolled forward. The lane curves a little there, so the pillar hides part of the office door and the bulletin board where they tape announcements about power washing and pool hours. The cone scraped the curve as the attendant moved it aside with his foot. A woman in a hatchback clicked her tongue and shifted into a different lane. The delivery van behind her took advantage of the opening, tires popping the seam in the pavement with a papery sound. As my car crept alongside the glass office wall, the air changed. The smell of the asphalt was replaced by that faint cleaner smell that offices have, disinfectant, paper, a whisper of toner, someone's citrus hand soap. In the window I saw my car, and above it a reflection of the two monitors in the booth, angled just enough that I could see the tiled view of the gate camera again. I could also see, in the office reflection, the property manager's desk, neat, a little flag and a plastic cup, a wilting plant that doesn't like fluorescent months. The red digits on the totem clicked forward. Maya captured another frame with the numbers and the angle of my car. She is gentle even when she is precise. Her left hand steadied the phone, her right thumb set the focus point. The shutter noise was a soft paper flick. She whispered the time to herself, not to the room, as if numbers feel safer when they're held. I didn't argue. I didn't perform a sigh or put on a show for the line. I rested the folder's bottom edge against the ridge of my knee and felt its weight. I thought of my late wife's note on a grocery list once. Tell him what you have and ask for what you need, and how simple those two moves are when you put them next to fear. The page with the clause lay on top, a pale rectangle in the dim interior light. My name on the letterhead faced up, steady as a license plate.
The attendant stood in the path and raised the same palm he had raised before. It is strange how a raised hand can mean stop or hello or I see you and I still need you to stop. He pointed me to a painted rectangle on the ground with the word inspect stenciled in white near the curb. A small sign on a metal stake read secondary verification with the kind of font you see on handheld scanners. I eased the car into that place and felt the slight tilt of the pavement toward the drain. I could hear the whine of the gate motor from across the driveway, up and down like a yawn that hasn't decided whether to open or close. People's voices bounced against the stucco. Someone's dog barked one time and then thought better of it. The night was arriving in slow layers, blue over gold, and the wind smelt like somebody's jasmine vine trying its best along a fence. I had worked years to afford small vines and small fences, and I knew the taste of rules by how they were enforced, not by how they were written. The attendant worked the radio again and set a code that sounded more like a room number than a policy. I saw the top of a head move behind the office door window and then vanish. The lights inside shifted from one panel to the next, the way offices pulse when someone moves through them. I could feel my heart go heavy and slow, not panicked, just old enough to make its opinions known. Maya opened the notes app in a practiced flick and typed the date, my plate number, the time on the totem, the word decal, visible, and a short description of the attendant's actions. She turned the screen so I could see the line of text. I nodded. She added the weather because she's learned that a true thing is truer when it sits on a small shelf of details. She asked if I wanted a photo of the secondary verification sign. I nodded again. She took it. I watched the booth monitors again. On one, a car that had been behind me sailed through now that it had jumped to the other lane. On another, I saw the wide view of the street out front, the way the lanes bottleneck where the maples lean in. The smallness of myself on those screens amused me in a way that would have made my wife smile. We used to tell each other stories of how we looked from higher windows when the ground got noisy. The attendant finally left the booth and approached my window with a clipboard. He didn't make eye contact then either. He asked for my license. I handed it to him, steady, as if I was passing him a recipe. He glanced, copied the number onto the clipboard, and returned it. His pen scratched with pressure. The scratch sounded like someone trying to erase something with a knife. He asked if I had registration on hand. I nodded. Maya had already opened the glove box a second time and found the envelope. The paper made that hushed fold sound when she slid it against the plastic tray. I handed it over and watched him glance again without really reading. He looked back toward the booth as if the monitors might tell him what to do next. I could see his youth then, not as a judgment, but as a fact. He was leaning on a process he hadn't fully learned to stand inside. The night deepened. The lights picked up the dust in the air and made it look like snow that forgot how to fall. A faint hum came from the office vents. On the community bulletin board, a flyer announced a cleanup day next Saturday and a reminder about pool fobs that expire at the end of the month. I considered how many reminders a place needs to keep itself running and how many reminders a man needs to keep himself whole.
The attendant returned to the booth and spoke into the intercom again. The voice that answered sounded older, thicker at the edges like paper retyped too many times. The words I picked out were supervisor, second-level verification, confirm with office, and hold. Hold landed with a small weight inside my chest. Hold is not a sentence. It is a posture that can last a minute or a decade. I have held through worse. I can hold here too. The folder sat like a small blue heart against my leg. Maya offered me a sip from her water bottle. The water tasted slightly of the bottle itself, a clean plastic note. It calmed the dry place in my throat.
She checked the camera roll and made a new album, named it Gate 7:15 p.m., added the best frame she had taken, and then a photo of the license plate, the sign, my decal again from a different angle. She is methodical in a way that would have made my wife proud. Her care is a kind of heat. I watched the position of the delivery van in the side mirror. The driver had settled into patience. He had the look of someone who drives for a living and measures time in loops rather than lines. He ate something from a paper bag. He tapped the wheel with a single finger. He wasn't angry anymore. He had already told his boss what the delay was. He would tell it again, the same way, later on. I knew that story too. The attendant lifted his radio once more and turned his head away in that small, private angle people use when they want to hide without leaving. He listened. He nodded to nothing. He set the radio down. Then he looked at me for the first time, directly. His eyes were not unkind. They were careful and tired. He raised his hand once more and pointed toward the office door. I eased the car a few feet forward, the tire bumping the lip of the painted rectangle. The office door, the one I could not see when I first turned in, stayed closed. The glass was reflective enough that it showed me my own shoulders through the overlay of the interior, like a double exposure from an old camera. The knob had a little scuff where rings had knocked it over months or years. The hallway behind it was a short run of carpet, ending in a framed green map with evacuation routes marked in yellow. I could smell, faintly, the ink from the printer that lives under the front desk. The attendant stepped to the center of the lane and set his feet apart, as if he were guarding a dock. He raised his palm higher than before and cupped it slightly, a universal sign that means, "Do not proceed." He said nothing. He didn't need to. The red light above the inspection bay blinked once and then steadied. Maya tapped something on her screen and gave a small nod to herself. She had synced the photos to the cloud, as she says, a sentence that still sounds like a prayer to me. She put the phone in her lap and folded her hands the way she used to before big tests at school. She didn't ask if we were almost done. She has learned that almost is a location people invent when they don't know where they are. I drew another breath slow enough to feel every inch of it. The folder warmed under my palm. I could hear my pulse in my ears, not loud, just insistent. The paper in the folder shifted with a dry whisper, as if to remind me that it was the same paper I had placed there at my kitchen table, under the soft light, with the smell of lemon oil and clean counters around me. That kitchen is where I promised myself I would bring the right language to any room that tried to make me smaller. Language with dates, numbers, clauses, and names. The booth phone rang, one of those harsh desk phones with a ringtone chosen by someone who likes to be obeyed. The attendant answered and turned his back to me to listen. He nodded, then nodded again, and then made the mistake of looking at me while he was still nodding. He turned his head away quickly, like his eyes had said something his mouth wasn't ready to say. He hung up. He took one step toward the office door, then hesitated. He looked at the red light, at the monitors, at the lane with the word inspect fading under my tires. I kept my hands where he could see them. I kept my shoulders relaxed. Age has given me the gift of knowing where my body is at all times in rooms like this. I placed the folder on the passenger seat and rested my fingertips on the edge, an anchor point and a promise. I thought of my wife's last evening on the porch, how the ice in our glasses sang when it cracked, how the sky rolled a ribbon of pink toward the horizon, and how she said, "You walk with proof, and you don't let them tell you that's impolite." I say her words back to myself sometimes, not to feel brave, but to feel precise. In the mirror, the delivery van's driver lifted his hand to me in a small salute, the way drivers talk to each other without language. I lifted mine back. The wind shifted and carried a bit of music from somewhere far in the complex, a radio on low. the kind of song that repeats 3 chords and promises nothing. Time moved in the only direction it knows. The red digits on the totem changed again. Lights blinked on in windows across the pool. A sprinkler clacked to life in a short, stubborn sputter, and then found its rhythm. The attendant took a breath you could see, squared his shoulders, and turned toward the office door. And just as my front tires rolled the last inch to the painted line, the office door swung open, and the supervisor stepped out with his hand raised in a hard stop. He planted himself like a post at the nose of my car and held the stop in the air long enough to become a shape. The red light over the bay steadied. The lane went quiet in that stretched-out way noise goes quiet when people are waiting for something to happen. I kept my hands on the wheel and let my breath find a rhythm I could work with. The asphalt radiated up through the floorboard, warm and a little sticky. My mouth tasted faintly of copper, the way it does when a night leans on your ribs. He stepped to my window and spoke low through the gap I rolled down with 2 fingers. He wanted me to leave the car here, keys on my person, and come into the office for secondary verification. The phrase had too many syllables for the distance we were covering. I nodded once. I put the car in park. Maya gathered her phone and her backpack, then reached for the blue folder like it was a handrail. I took it, felt the familiar weight settle across my palm, and opened my door to the antiseptic cool of the office air. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed with that thin pressure that makes your temples remember old headaches. The front desk had a mat with the HOA logo and a tray of pens with caps chewed flat by 100 small anxieties. The smell of printer toner mixed with lemon cleaner and a trace of stale coffee. A bulletin board held notices about landscaping and a collection drive for winter coats that someone should have taken down last month. The hum of an air conditioner climbed and stepped down, like a metronome set 1 notch too fast.
The supervisor moved ahead of us, shoulders hunched, clipboard tucked into his armpit. He pulled a form from a drawer and slid it across the counter to me. Incident report, the top line read, as if the words could make what was happening belong in a neat column. He pointed to the boxes in order: date, time, location, staff present, nature of verification, notes. His tone meant routine, but his eyes meant don't make this complicated. Around us, the small sounds of an office pretending to be a courthouse kept their steady pace. The click of a stapler somewhere out of sight, a phone ringing twice and stopping, a drawer closing with a hollow wooden thud. I wrote slowly and clearly, not because I am slow, but because slowness can be a kind of proof. The pen's ball scratched faintly on the carbonless copy. I put the exact hour from the totem clock, the lane designation stenciled on the pavement, the word decal visible in the space for description, and the staffer's name from his badge, spelled the way it was printed. I added my plate number, unit number, and the language from the parking guidelines. Active credential when affixed and unexpired. I didn't ask whether I needed to include that. I just placed it where it belonged, the way you set a glass on a coaster. Maya stood at my shoulder and held the phone ready, the camera open to the last frame she had taken. She whispered the time to herself again, the way she does with multiplication tables and bush schedules, like repetition braids a rope across a gap. She took a photo of the report as I filled it, not to be dramatic, but because the world is kinder when your facts are alive in more than one place.
She reached into her backpack for a short pencil and slid it next to my hand. I didn't need it, but I liked seeing it there, the way I liked seeing her there, small and steady, heat at my side. The receptionist, a woman with a tidy bun and a cardigan with a snag on the sleeve, appeared from the back and said she was Tina. Her voice had a practiced calm to it, the tone you use with people who arrive at a counter already carrying the weight of something heavy. She gave me a stamped receipt with a number that started with IR and ended with a string of digits. She asked if I wanted a copy of the incident report for my records. I told her yes. She made one with the copier that whined and then coughed papers into the tray. The warm copy smelled like plastic and heat and ink not quite dry. She set it on the counter and pressed the corner so it wouldn't curl. The supervisor hovered and pretended to check the time on his watch. He told Tina to note that it was a secondary verification initiated at the gate, not a routine audit. He emphasized initiated, and for a second I wondered who he wanted to hear that. Me, Tina, the ceiling? I kept my eyes on the boxes and filled in the line for requested action. Review gate camera footage. Cross-reference with totem clock. Validate against license plate reader log. Confirm policy clause regarding active decal. The words felt like stepping stones. I placed each one and balanced on it. Out in the lane, visible through the blinds, the red light over the bay held steady. The line had shifted. The delivery van that had been behind me was idling in a different angle, and a neighbor's SUV now sat where my car had been moments ago. In the reflection on the glass, the monitors at the gate showed the split feeds: portico, driveway, street, pool gate. Small boxes of reality tiled in a grid, little versions of the same night repeated across angles like a deck of cards spread too far. Myas asked for my identification to attach an image to the report. I handed her my license. She set it on a small flatbed scanner and pressed a button. The scanner bar moved slowly under the glass, bathing my face in a strip of bright light like a shallow wave. She returned the license with 2 hands and a nod of thanks that wasn't theatrical. She wrote my name on a sticky note and affixed it to the front of the folder that would now contain my incident, a word I have spent too many hours of my life living inside.
The supervisor motioned to a side door, marked staff only, and said he needed to consult the log. He asked us to wait at the tall desk where they signed for packages. I could smell the wood of the desk under the polish, a dusty sweetness like the inside of an old piano. Maya leaned her elbows on the edge and closed her eyes for a second. When she opened them, she was ready again. She sorted the photos on her phone into a new folder and named it with the time and the words Eastgate Check. The small act of naming sat in my chest like a hand placed there. My wife used to say that order is a kind of kindness we can offer the future. A man I recognized from my building came in with a rolled-up poster tube under his arm. He wore a polo with his company's name on it and the expression of someone who had been yanked out of dinner by a buzzing phone. He saw me, saw the folder, saw the red light in the corner of his eye, and nodded in the way men nod when they want to say 3 sentences and decide to say none. He introduced himself as Sam and asked Tina if he could drop off a parcel for the boardroom. He works in IT. I remember him from the pool committee last summer, teaching the board how to reset the Wi-Fi when it locked out half the fobs. He glanced at the monitors and the clock on the wall, and his gaze measured the space between the two the way a carpenter measures a door frame. He asked Tina, quietly, whether the camera's time offset had been fixed after last month's storm. Tina hesitated and said she didn't know. Sam didn't push. He just let the question sit there like a useful tool within reach. He remembered my name without effort and asked if everything was okay. I said we were doing a secondary verification. The words tasted like swallowing a penny. He nodded again, not patronizing, not bright, just listening. The supervisor returned, carrying a tablet that had been dropped too often. The corner was spotted with cracks. He woke it with too many taps and then found the log app. The screen displayed a column of plate numbers with timestamps and a status icon in green or yellow. He found mine, read the line twice, and then looked at me as if my face might make the numbers rearrange themselves. I set the folder on the desk and opened to the page with my email from the HOA confirming the decal and the space. The subject line used words like assignment and authorization that don't comfort anyone but do a job when the air gets thin. He mumbled that the log showed a time and that time would need to be reconciled with what the camera showed. He said reconcile as if we had all gathered for an accounting. He talked in circles about process, the way people do when they are afraid of the undercurrent in the room. I asked him, without heat, to include the totem clock in the review. He looked at me like I had asked him to bring in the moon. Maya lifted her phone and showed him a photo with the decal and the totem clock in the same frame. He blinked and then looked grateful to have something with edges. Tina wrote my request on the report with the pen that left a clean blue line. She read the sentence back to us quietly. Resident requests camera footage review cross-referenced with totem clock and license plate reader. She added the IR number and the time. She stamped the bottom again, this time with a smaller stamp that said received. The little thunk of the stamp hitting paper reminded me of 100 waiting rooms and their windows with holes cut into them.
Sam asked if the camera's time source was the same as the license plate readers. The supervisor said he believed so. Sam tilted his head in a way that meant believing wasn't knowing. He offered, without insisting, to stand by if they needed help interpreting any drift between the systems. He used that word drift like a man who has watched a boat slip its moorings in slow weather. The supervisor nodded, but didn't write anything down. I wrote drift on the back of my copy of the report and underlined it once. The office felt smaller as the minutes stacked. The lights buzzed harder, the lemon cleaner seemed to get sharper, or my nose learned it more completely. Somewhere down the hall, a door closed softly, and a printer began to sing its thin chorus. Maya shifted her weight from one foot to the other, and then stilled again. She lifted the folder's front flap and straightened the pages I had been using. She smoothed the corner with her finger and did not look me in the eye, as if looking would let something cracked fall open. The supervisor signaled us to follow him into the small conference room. The chairs were steel with padded seats and a faint smell of dust. A flat screen hung on the wall with its own hum, different from the lights, a deeper electrical note. He plugged in the tablet, pressed a series of buttons on a remote whose batteries were tired, and brought up the live camera feed in the top left corner and the archive in a grid below. He selected the archive for the last half hour, and the thumbnails populated one by one, gray to color, like developing film in a tray. We stood shoulder to shoulder at the end of the table because sitting would have made the moment feel like class instead of a ledger. The supervisor chose a clip and let it play. There was my car, coming into the frame, my hood dull under the portico light, the decal a pale dot in the lower corner of the windshield. The gate arm rose, then held, then lowered. The image stuttered once, as if the recording had blinked. The sound was muted, but I could hear the room's own noises annotate the silence. Maya's breath through her nose, Sam's shoes creaking, Tina's pen cap click. In the lower right of the video, the timestamp glowed a steady gold. In my head,
I put that number next to the totem clock number, which I had watched change while Maya took her photos. My mind has done this kind of math for decades, the kind where numbers sit like stones in a river, and you have to feel your way across by the bottoms of your feet. The numbers did not sit next to each other the way I expected. They sat with a sliver of distance that should not have been there. The supervisor scrubbed back and forth a few seconds to catch the moment when the cone shifted and the attendant moved into frame. He zoomed in on the corner of the windshield where the decal lived. The pixels broke and remade themselves. The decal remained clear enough to read the outline of the HOA seal, not the words, but the shape. He paused and held the frame while his thumb hovered over the save icon like a dragonfly over a pond. He looked at the timestamp again, then up at the wall clock, then at the time on his watch, as if 3 clocks might conspire to make meaning. Tina, who had been quiet, stepped closer and read the report number again, aloud this time, as if saying it could seat it better in the room. She wrote the video file name next to it. She asked if we wanted to add a note that the resident supplied photos showing the totem clock with the decal in the same frame. She did not wait for permission. She wrote it neatly, the letters square.
Sam cleared his throat softly and mentioned, almost conversational, that the gate camera had been known to lag a few minutes after a power cycle, and that if the totem clock pulled from a separate source, the two could be out of alignment. He said it not to excuse anything, but to let the room understand there were gears we could see and gears we couldn't. He was offering context, not cover. He was not on anyone's side. He was in favor of the clock being the clock. The supervisor nodded too fast. He toggled to a screen that showed the network settings. The interface was a clumsy blue. He didn't know what he was looking at. He toggled back. He played the clip again. He paused on a frame where my car's headlights caught the edge of the cone and threw a bright stripe onto the curb. The time in the corner burned steady. I could feel the old hush pull up a chair in my chest again. I thought of hallways, long and carpeted, with glass doors and cheerful posters about community. I thought of how many times a word like random has been asked to do a job it was not born to do. My fingers found the edge of the folder and pressed, not to hurt, but to anchor. Maya touched the back of my arm with 3 fingers and let them rest there. Her touch was not a question. It was a wire that hummed between us, carrying a current I recognized from houses we had fixed together, from long afternoons with stubborn screws and instructions that lied. The supervisor reached for the mouse and opened the metadata panel. A box popped up with a file name, a date, and a time stored in a tiny, unsmiling font. He made a note on his clipboard and then paused. His eyes moved from the metadata box to Maya's photo when she lifted her phone and held it at an angle where the camera captured the same instant from our side of the glass. Her photo showed the totem clock's red digits a certain way. The video showed another way. The difference was small enough to be dismissed by someone who needed to go home on time, and large enough to matter to someone who lives by the weight of small differences. The room drew a breath together and waited to see which way the scale would tip. The fluorescent hum seemed louder. The AC kicked on and made the plastic blinds shiver in their frame. Tina's pen hovered over the report like a bird unsure where to land. Sam looked at the supervisor without speaking, that skilled kind of quiet that invites a person to choose skill over habit. The cursor slid toward a button labeled Pending Review. The gold numbers in the corner of the video did not care what button anyone pressed. Maya's photo did not care either. The 2 sets of numbers sat a thumb width apart like neighbors who didn't wave. I adjusted the folder in my hands and let the paper breathe against my palm. The supervisor leaned closer to the screen, squeaked, and said almost under his breath that the times didn't match. He swallowed and went still in that narrow place where a person decides whether to open a drawer or close it. The air of the office cooled another degree, and the hallway beyond the door gave back a faint echo of footsteps from someone we could not see. He put his finger on the mouse, hesitated,
and whispered a sentence that should have been louder in a room like this, a sentence I have heard in different clothes for a very long time. "This complicates it." He said, "This complicates it," and the words settled on the table like a stack of blank forms. He didn't meet my eyes. He stared at the numbers at the bottom of the clip, and then at the red digits on the wall clock, and then at the small blue vein in his wrist pulsing above the clipboard. I felt the familiar dip in my chest, the way floors sometimes sink in old houses at the spot where the sofa has always sat. My mouth went dry in that instant way offices can make you dry. I lifted the blue folder a half inch and let it rest back down, a quiet reminder to myself that weight is something you can choose.
The room smelled like toner and lemon and a little hot plastic from the HDMI cable plugged into the back of the screen. The fluorescent panels hummed and threw a hard white across the conference table, raising every scuff on the laminate to the status of a fact. My hand remembered my wife's lists, the way she circled the item that mattered and left everything else to argue in the margin. I placed my thumb on the clause about an active decal and let the paper warm under my skin. Maya moved closer until her shoulder touched my arm. Her phone screen glowed low and steady, showing the photo with the totem clock locked in the same rectangle as the decal. She slid to the next image, the one where the red digits had climbed by one. The difference between the video stamp and her photo was not big enough to make a movie about and not small enough to throw away. She said nothing. Her breath was even, the way she made it even before exams in dentist chairs. Sam rubbed a knuckle against his jaw and tilted his head toward the screen. He spoke softly, like he was talking to a skittish dog, about clocks that think they agree and then don't, about devices that wander away from the time they promised to keep. He said that word again, drift, and it sounded less like water and more like something you could measure with a ruler if you were patient and not in a hurry to go home. The supervisor ran a palm down the front of his shirt, smoothing a wrinkle that wasn't there, and asked Tina to add a note that there might be an offset. He said might as if it were a lifeline he could keep in his pocket. Tina wrote carefully, square letters, and then added the IR number and stamped the corner with the small received stamp that made a hollow thud on the paper. I asked, still without heat, that the review include the totem clock and the license plate reader, and that the policy clause be read alongside the footage. I could hear my own voice like I was hearing it in a hallway through a door. The hallway in my head had carpet and framed notices about pool hours and a poster with a smiling family holding clipboards. The hallway smelled like lemon and air that had been indoors too long. I steadied my tone, the way you steady a ladder with your own foot. The supervisor made a shape of agreement with his mouth, but didn't write. He said he would have to consult the property manager, and that after that they could decide the appropriate next step. He said these things in the careful rhythm of someone stepping stones across a creek. He didn't want to get his shoes wet. I've been wet for a long time in rooms like this, and I know that shoes dry if you keep walking. He left the room with the tablet under his arm. The door closed with a soft click and a whisper of air. We stood in the leftover hum and looked at the paused frame of my car on the screen. The decal shone a little, like a coin in mud. Maya slid her phone into her back pocket and put both palms on the table, as if the table might slide away if she didn't anchor it. She examined the edge of the laminate where the veneer had bubbled and peeled, and then smoothed it flat with her finger, as if the small repair could be practice for a larger one. The air conditioner kicked up a notch and raised the hairs on my forearm. I thought of winter mornings in our old house, steam on the window,
my wife's note beside the kettle, calling out the day's errands in that crisp, tidy hand. Tell them what you have and ask for what you need. Be specific. Leave a trail you can follow back if somebody turns off the lights. The blue folder was our trail and our lamp and our small, stubborn boat.
Tina knocked lightly and stepped halfway back in to ask if we wanted water. Maya nodded and took 2 small paper cups from the tray. The water tasted like office pipes, a little iron, a little old. It cooled the copper behind my tongue. I watched Tina look at the screen and then at the report again. She had the expression of a person who knows the path to the copier by heart and still counts his steps so she won't think about other things. The supervisor's voice floated from the hallway, low and fast. Another voice answered, heavier and ironed at the edges. The words I caught were property manager, not available, protocol, tomorrow. The tomorrow lodged in my ear like grit. I pictured the red light at the bay holding the night at the throat for another hour while words like tomorrow lined up like excuses at a window. I placed the folder flat and slid out the email printed on good paper that said assignment of space and decal delivered and valid through the date printed twice. The paper felt more alive than the voice in the hall. The supervisor returned with the property manager's name in his mouth like a shield. He said the review could be scheduled for the morning, and the form would be held in pending review status until then. He added that there was no indication of wrongdoing, and that we should not take the process as a personal reflection. He said personal like a blanket people throw over a fire when they don't want to see it anymore. I asked him to include on the report that the lane was currently blocked for a secondary verification initiated under the label random check, and that the red light over the bay had been steady for the course of the incident, and that the line of cars had been asked to reroute. He blinked. Tina looked at me, and then at him, and then wrote it down exactly as I said it. The act of writing is a small heat. It warmed the corner of the room. Maya pulled up her photo again and zoomed to the reflection of the totem clock in the side window. It was faint, but the numbers held. She took another photo of her own screen, the way people used to make Xeroxes of Xeroxes when they didn't trust the original to survive the night. She whispered the time to herself, then pressed and held to copy it into the notes where she had typed the words drift between systems. Her handwriting in the app was neat even when she typed, because neatness is not only about pen and paper, it's about breath. Sam shifted his weight and asked if the manager could be reached for a short call, because if the systems were misaligned, it was a training issue with immediate effects on the gate, not a philosophical question for the morning. He said it gently, the way you point out a nail sticking up on the deck before somebody's bare foot finds it. The supervisor did not like being barefoot in the conversation. He said he would try again and left the room with the tablet pressed too tight into his armpit, plastic squealing in protest. We stood in the light and the hum and the neatness. I felt the small humiliations pile themselves into a tidy Karen. The words random and hold and pending review. The way the apology in the lane had been directed past me. The way times that don't agree can become a net rather than a question. I glanced at Maya and found steadiness by looking at her, the same way I used to find my horizon by looking at my wife's hands when she kneaded dough at the counter. Maya glanced back and gave me that nod that means I am here and not going anywhere. The supervisor came back with a different posture, as if the hallway had placed a hand on his shoulder and turned him half a degree toward us. He said the property manager was now available by phone, and that given the current condition at the gate and the discrepancy in the timestamps, an extraordinary review could be considered this evening to prevent further confusion. He said considered, and I made a small home for the word while we waited to see if it would be allowed to live.
He put the phone on the table in speaker mode and dialed. A man answered with a careful brightness, the way people sound when they stand near a window and want the room to think the sun is for them. The supervisor laid out the facts the way he had them. He kept his voice even. He avoided using any words that would make the conversation louder than it already was. He left the space open where the word drift should have gone. Sam supplied it, soft. The property manager paused, a pause you could have poured water into. Then he said this was unusual, but he understood the need to clarify the procedure and that he would convene an extraordinary session with 2 board members as soon as he could reach them, for the sole purpose of verifying the alignment of the systems and confirming the status of the decal under the policy. He said sole purpose twice. He liked it when purpose knew how to be alone. Tina's shoulders dropped a degree. She wrote the words extraordinary session on the report and drew a neat box around them. She underlined tonight once. The pen left a sound like a zipper opening on a tent. Maya looked at me with quick light in her eyes and then looked down again, as if light was something we shouldn't spill on the carpet. I let out a breath I hadn't admitted I was holding. The folder shifted on my palm and made its dry whisper like paper speaking to itself. The property manager asked that we remain in the conference room and that the screen be prepared for a controlled review under his direction. He said controlled like the word was a dam and we were agreeing to stand downstream. I said we were ready. He said the staff should attach the policy clause to the report and ensure the IR number matched the video file name in the metadata. Tina had already done both. She clicked her pen closed as if she were giving the moment a lid. The next few minutes were cables and clicks and the minor sadness of remotes with tired batteries. The supervisor tugged the HDMI with a grunt that made the plug squeal. The screen went blank and then slept and then woke to an input screen with squares of blue and the source labels that never make sense to anyone on the first try. Sam reached the back of the table and switched the input without asking. He has the kind of hands rooms trust, even if the people in them don't know how to say it. The live gate feed returned in the corner, small and insistent, the arm going up and down for people whose names we weren't saying. In the hallway, I heard the first thud of chairs being slid across carpet in the boardroom next door. The property manager arrived in person, at last, a man with a crisp shirt and the expression of someone who has practiced neutral in the mirror. He smelled faintly of cologne, cedar and something sweet. He greeted no one, then greeted everyone, then placed his hands on the back of a chair and asked to hear the report number. Tina read it, clear. He asked to see the photos Maya had captured with the totem clock. Maya held her phone so the light would catch it and not glare. He studied the red digits, and for just one quick second his face forgot to be neutral. Then it remembered. He asked if we were willing to proceed with the understanding that only the relevant frames would be reviewed, and that the session would be noted as extraordinary due to gate congestion and possible system misalignment. His words arranged themselves like traffic cones. I said yes. My voice sounded like mine again. He stepped into the boardroom and asked the staffer to set out 3 extra chairs. Tina gathered the report and a pen and a stapler and a small roll of tape as if she were packing a hospital bag. The supervisor looked smaller in the doorway than he had in the lane. Sam held the door with his forearm and let us pass, not with ceremony, but with a quiet that placed the night in its proper order.
We walked as a small parade of paper and plastic down the carpeted hall. The carpet gave off a fatigued smell, like it had listened to too many meetings. On the wall, framed photos of the complex in bright daylight showed a different country than the one we were walking in. The air was a degree cooler in the boardroom, and the lights were dimmer, as if dimness could teach quiet. A long table faced a mounted screen that reflected a ghost of our shapes back to us. Maya took the seat at my left and set her phone in front of her like a pocket witness. She straightened the strap of her backpack on the chair back. She looked down at her shoes and then up at the screen and then at me. She gave me that half smile her grandmother used to use when the dinner rolls came out right and we were all in our right places. The property manager stood at the head of the table with his palms resting on the wood.
He had the remote. He clicked it, and the projector woke with a faint fan whine and a smell like warm dust. The screen went from black to that no-signal blue to a gray that suggested something was about to become visible. The hum was lower in here, more throat than teeth. The door clicked shut behind the last person, and the latch made that small sound doors make when they decide among themselves how a night will go. Tina read the opening line of the report and the IR number into the quiet. The supervisor cleared his throat and confirmed the time range to be reviewed. Sam stood 2 steps back from the table where he could see the network settings if needed. My palms warmed on the folder, and my spine remembered how to be tall without being loud. My mouth tasted like water and paper and the faintest trace of jasmine from the vine outside the gate. The property manager raised the remote and held it still, and the projector's light swelled against the blank screen like a held breath. If this moment speaks to you, like it. Comment your view and share. Each click invites another witness. The projector's fan gathered itself and blew a thin stream of warm air across the ceiling, and the screen shifted from gray to an image of the gate, small and insistent in the upper left. The property manager stood at the end of the table with the remote in his hand, shoulders squared in that way people practice in photographs. He outlined how we would proceed as if laying silverware. The archived clip from the time range specified, the license plate reader log on the second window, the totem clock captured in our photos as a third point, and the policy clause read into the record beside him. He spoke like someone easing a heavy drawer back onto its rails. I could smell the faint dust the projector had woken, a smell like old books warmed by afternoon light. The carpet under my feet pressed back with that tired spring common to rooms where many small battles have ended without parades. My palms found the heat of the blue folder against my thighs. The folder has become part of my posture over the years. It sits where nerves used to sit. Maya settled at my left. She lined up her phone with the edge of the table and slid a printed copy of our best photo beside it. She had used the office printer while we were moving cables, the paper still warm as she set it down. The totem clock's red digit sat in the corner of the frame, with my decal in the same field, a small marriage of objects that ought to have been allowed to tell their simple truth without witnesses. The property manager signaled and the projector supervisor launched the archived clip. The camera showed the portico's cone of light, the smooth back and forth of the gate arm, the parade of headlights sliding in like beads over a string. Then my car, recognizable to me by 2 small chips in the paint near the grill, moved into the frame. The decal glowed faint and oval. He paused, scrubbed back 2 seconds, and paused again. The corner timestamp burned steady.
Sam's voice came from just behind my shoulder, quiet, specific. He asked for the network status window for the camera system and for the license plate reader software. The supervisor toggled. A blue interface with too many buttons flopped onto the screen. Sam didn't take the mouse, he just pointed to the spots where meaningful information lived. The property manager nodded to the supervisor to click, and the window with server time and camera time populated with numbers like 2 clocks seated next to each other at a table without speaking. The offset was there, not huge, not microscopic. Tina took it down, writing the digits with slow strokes. The pen scratch sounded like someone unwrapping a candy in church and failing to do it quietly. She added a note to include the phrase, "measured offset pending verification," and then she underlined the IR number on her copy. The small acts of emphasis gave the moment an outline. I could feel my breath lengthen. Maya slid her printed photo forward until it touched the edge of the property manager's notes.
He placed one fingertip on the corner to keep it from curling and compared the red digits to the lower right of the clip. He didn't announce anything. He didn't need to. His eyes narrowed in the way attention narrows when it is working. He asked the supervisor to open the license plate reader log in a second pane. The log populated with a grid of entries, plate numbers dark and square, timestamps to the second. There was my plate, my car, my night. He drew a small rectangle on the paper in front of him and boxed the 3 time sources in it with arrows: camera, plate reader, totem photo. He didn't say the word triangulate, but the picture said it. He asked if the system shared a time source. Sam explained briefly that the camera relied on a network time configuration that, after power interruptions, could fail to rejoin the authoritative server, and that the plate reader pulled from a separate module designed to persist more stubbornly. He used simple words. He made the problem look like a chair with one short leg. The property manager instructed the supervisor to document the presence of the offset and not to adjust any time sources in the middle of review. Chain of custody, he said, and his voice gained a notch of firmness. Tina reached into a desk drawer and took out a labeled USB stick and a small evidence sleeve. She wrote the date, the time, the IR number, and the file name in neat block letters, then looked to the property manager, who nodded. She asked the supervisor to export the specific clip to the stick. The progress bar crept. The projector's fan lifted a bit, the sound of a room breathing. The policy clause lay open on the table between my palms, a sheet I have worn thin with my eyes. Active credential when affixed and unexpired. Words can be chains or keys. These have been a key that opens quietly if you turn them the way they ask to be turned. I positioned the clause so Tina could copy its exact language into the report. She read it back out loud, not to anyone in particular, but to the record. Her voice steadied me the way metronomes steady piano practice. The supervisor's defensiveness dropped by degrees as the tasks multiplied. He moved closer to Tina's pen as if warmth lived near ink. He whispered something about the gate lane's congestion and the decision to call for a secondary verification under pressure. He stopped himself on the word pressure. He looked at the panel of timers again. Then he asked Tina to note that the phrase random check had been used at the gate, initiated by booth staff, and that he accepted responsibility for the escalation under second-level verification without referencing the policy clause. He said it without flinching. The words sat on the paper like a tool placed on a bench, heavy enough to be noticed, shaped to be used. Maya listened the way she listens to a teacher who's finally stopped trying to be liked and started trying to be clear. Her shoulders dropped a fraction. She placed her phone on the evidence sleeve so the photo couldn't slide away. She didn't smile. She is too careful with joy to spend it that way. But a small ribbon of air moved through her that hadn't been there in the gate lane.
We reviewed one more clip 5 minutes earlier to confirm that the offset wasn't a one-frame stutter. It wasn't. The difference held like a stubborn seam. Sam glanced at the network time again, then asked for a ping test to the authoritative server. The screen showed a beat and wait pattern that told anyone who knows such patterns that the server was reachable, but the camera had not rejoined after a previous drop. He suggested gently that the system be scheduled for synchronization after the review, and that in the future the gate team be given a single-glance indicator for time alignment. The property manager didn't write, but I could see his head tilt to store the suggestion somewhere with edges. The license plate reader log showed my entry precisely where my mind knew it should be. The boardroom's air felt denser with that fact, not lighter. Facts don't float, they sit. The property manager asked the supervisor to print the relevant lines and initial them. The printer in the hall exhaled, and the pages came in warm, curling slightly as Tina smoothed them on the table. She attached them to the report with a single staple, the click of which sounded very final, and wasn't. I have learned to hear the difference between final and now. Through the glass wall, beyond the framed photos of happy sidewalks, I could just make out the pool gates and the small light over the lifeguard's chair. The world continued in parallel to our room, indifferent to clause and offset. A sprinkler hissed in the shrubs and made that fine, sweet smell you get when water wakes dust. I let the smell enter and leave my chest the way you let a visitor pass through a room on their way to the door. The property manager asked if there were any additional materials we wished to attach. I slid the email confirming the space and the decal across, and he read the subject line and the first sentence with the absorption of a person who understands that the first sentence is where truth promises to be itself. He nodded and returned it to my folder without bending a corner. Respect can hide in small hands.
Tina read her notes, line by line, no embroidery. Incident report created and received, photo evidence of totem clock and decal submitted, archived footage exported and sealed, measured offset documented, license plate log printed and attached, policy clause cited and copied. She added that the team would log the presence of the red light over the secondary verification bay during the incident and the rerouting of traffic to the south lane. The meeting had begun to move like a slow cart with weight, steady, forward, no rattles that couldn't be tightened with a small wrench. The supervisor stood upright for the first time and asked, almost to himself, what the training language should be for nights like this if the system shows misalignment indicators. He looked at the property manager the way people look at weather. The property manager said that if indicators are present, visual confirmation of an active decal plus a plate reader check should be sufficient to proceed under policy with notation for later review. He said it like a draft sentence that had not yet met the board's pen. He placed a line break there and let silence sit on it. Maya wrote that sentence in her own notes. She writes her own minutes of the nights that matter. I glanced at her handwriting on the screen. Clean, upright letters, no slant, as if gravity had agreed to behave. My wife used to laugh at how I angled my lists until the words climbed like a hillside. Maya is a leveler. She places her tools in straight rows and then builds in straight lines. The property manager returned to the policy clause again, this time touching the words active credential with a fingertip, the way one sometimes touches names on old monuments. He asked Tina to copy the clause onto a single page to place at the front of the report for easy reference during any discussion that followed. She printed, the machine coughed heat, and she centered the clause on its own page and stapled it with two staples, one high, one low, as if guardrails lived in staples.
Sam asked a practical question about creating a small laminated card for gate staff that listed the steps for a verification when time sources disagree. He spoke as though he were describing the sequence of screws to remove a stubborn panel, exact, not dramatic. The supervisor nodded and said such a card would have helped tonight. He didn't apologize. He reached for something sturdier. That is sometimes better than an apology that hides in its own sound. The property manager summarized what lay on the table without pointing at anyone. A system showing drift on one component, a plate reader log consistent with expected entry, A resident's photo tying the totem clock to the decal in the same frame, a policy clause that defines the status of an affixed unexpired decal. He said the words in a slow row, no garnish. He asked if anyone objected to the components as described. No one did. The projector sang its small, constant song like a kettle that has decided not to boil. He returned the clip to the exact frame where the decal sat brightest and let the image hold. The light from the screen washed our faces with a pale sheen. The table smelled faintly of dust that had lived in wood for years and not wanted to be disturbed. Tina wrote the word hold next to the frame time and drew a square around it. She added the phrase reference frame for discussion. Her square was not a cage, it was a shelf. In the hallway, the building quieted. The printer stopped. The phones were silent. The small conversations and rubber-soled footsteps of office life had gone home. The boardroom's door had that settled feeling doors get when a room has gathered enough attention to be itself. I let my back find the chair and felt the up and down ache at the base of my spine soften as it recognized the shape of wood under my ribs. Maya's knee touched mine under the table. I don't know if she meant it or if knees just do that when two people share a night. The property manager placed the remote on the table as if placing a glass down near a sleeping child. He spoke about next steps as you would speak about laying tar on a seam before the rain. He said the components would be considered in order and that any decision would turn on the alignment of those components under the policy and the record. He did not say outcome. He did not say resolution. He said record and alignment. Two friendly words if you let them be. He asked Tina to prepare the attachments for the file and to ready a short summary for the minutes noting the presence of a measured offset, the evidence sources, and the clause. She nodded and straightened the pages into a clean stack. She placed a yellow sticky note on the top that read, "In hand too neat to belong to a hurried life, ready for review." The supervisor excused himself to step to the gate and instruct the booth to route traffic and to keep the red light over the secondary base steady until the session finished. He stood straighter when he left. His hands had something to do that wasn't hiding. The property manager took a breath you could see and stood with his hands behind his back like a schoolmaster. Sam checked the network windows one last time and then stepped away, satisfied to leave the numbers as they were, observed, contained, not tinkered with before their work was done. I placed the blue folder closed on the table and slid my palm over the cover as if smoothing a bedsheet. The paper inside had warmed and taken a slight curve at the corners. In my mind, my wife's voice moved through the room the way wind moves through a screen, present, gentle, the exact opposite of dramatic. Tell them what you have. Ask for what you need. Make sure the paper remembers you were here. The room had learned to remember. Maya leaned her shoulder into me, a fraction, not a hug, not a brace, just a contact that told my bones that her bones were near. The room balanced itself around that fact. My breath found an easy path. The projector's hum became just a sound. The light washed and held. We were in a room made of procedures and people and paper, and for the first time that night, it felt like the room knew it.
When the property manager lifted the clause page one more time, his voice softened around the edges of the words. He set it down with care and said we would continue shortly with the focused review. We sat still. The gate arm on the small screen moved up for a stranger and down again. The night outside remained the night. Soft jasmine and sprinkler mist, and the thousand breathing things that live in hedges and under eaves. I rested my hand on the folder and let the steady in my chest be steady. The property manager lifted the remote again, and the image on the screen brightened from a soft wash to a clean shot of the portico. He outlined the order in a voice that held the room without squeezing it. Frame at entry, confirm decal visibility, match the license plate reader to that frame, compare it with the totem clock photographed in the same moment, then read the policy. He didn't ask for agreement. He made a path, and we stepped on it. The clip rolled. My hood entered the pool of light. The decal sat in the lower corner like a coin set into glass. He froze the frame and pointed with a fingertip, not the remote, as if touching the air could steady what the air held. He signaled the supervisor to bring up the license plate reader pane. The grid of alphanumeric entries appeared, and my plate sat in its place, time stamped to the second. He wrote that time in a small square on his notepad. He didn't look at me when he read it out loud. He let the number live in the room all by itself. Maya tilted her phone so the screen's reflection wouldn't wash out the totem digits. She slid the printed photo next to the property manager's notes so that the red numbers sat within his reach. He set the tip of his pen on the paper and matched the digits to the frame time with a deliberate movement, like fitting a lid to a jar. He did not perform satisfaction. He counted it. He asked the supervisor to open the camera system's status pane. The numbers for server time and camera time sat side by side and disagreed. Tina wrote the difference, then wrote the word offset again and put a short line under it. The pen clicked twice. The projector's fan exhaled. Somewhere outside the door, a chair scraped and then settled. He read the sentence from the policy then, the one I keep close enough to touch. An affixed, unexpired decal constitutes an active credential and authorizes entry under standard conditions. He read it the way you level a table, moving slowly until the wobble stops. He placed the sheet in front of him and tapped the corner once, a quiet punctuation. He asked the supervisor to roll the clip 3 seconds forward and 3 seconds back. He wanted the entry to live as motion, not only as a still. He wanted the room to feel the gate arms left the way the lane felt it. The arm rose, paused, lowered. The decal caught the light and dimmed with it. The time stayed steady in gold at the corner, while the plate reader's entry in the log sat steady in black on white. The totem's red numbers in Maya's frame refused to join the camera's idea of time, even though both were describing the same air. He set the remote down and spoke to the report, to the file, to the minutes. He said the words as if they were a kind of gentle verdict. The resident's credential was valid at the time of approach. The plate reader confirms the presence of the vehicle at the expected time. The camera system presents a measured offset from the network time source. The decision to initiate a secondary verification at the bay was made under congestion, without reference to the clause. He listed these things like items on a workbench. No heat, no music. The supervisor listened with his hands folded and his chin tucked. He did not argue. He nodded once like a person who knows what a tool is for when it is placed in his hand. He asked Tina to note that he would schedule a synchronization of the camera time after this session, and to include in the training that when indicators of misalignment are present, visual confirmation of a valid decal plus a plate reader check should be sufficient to proceed under policy. He looked at me then, not with apologies shaped like a shield, but with something flatter and more durable. He said he would be the one to deliver that training.
The property manager turned to the door and asked the attendant from the gate to step in. I had noticed him standing in the hall, but he had been there, quiet in his polo, key ring against his thigh. He smelled like the night air, a little of cut grass and car exhaust from the lane. He stood just inside the door with his shoulders set in the way young men set them when they think that rigid is the same as ready. The property manager read the relevant lines of the report in an even rhythm. He described the use of the phrase random check and the instruction to hold, the rerouting of the south lane and the presence of the offset in the system. He did not scold. He asked the attendant to confirm whether he had reviewed the policy clause recently and whether he had a step card at the booth for handing ID questions when the system indicators don't agree. The attendant said no to both, and the word hung there, harmless and heavy. The property manager said there would be immediate steps. First, a laminated card at the booth for the sequence when time sources disagree. Check decal, check plate reader, proceed under policy, flag for review. Second, a scheduled synchronization of the camera system with the authoritative time server, verified and documented. Third, a training segment for all gate staff within the week, emphasizing the clause and the sequence under pressure. Fourth, an update to the duty sheet so that a supervisor must verify the presence of misalignment indicators before moving a car into secondary verification. He spoke like a carpenter setting screws, one at each corner, then the middle. He turned to the supervisor and asked for a short written acknowledgement of his decision at the gate. The supervisor signed the line Tina placed under the sentence about escalation without clause reference. His signature was careful, a little too slow, like someone learning his name again. Tina attached the acknowledgement to the report with a second staple that landed beside the first. Two staples make a small bridge. The paper settled against itself. He turned back to us and said there would also be a notation on my account. He said it slowly so it would be heard properly. The notation would record the review, the validity of the credential at the time, and the presence of the system offset, so that any future check would see the record before they saw the person. He said record like a good word, and right then it was. Maya's breath eased. I could hear her travel the short path in her chest without stumbling. She kept her phone on the table as if it were a hand resting there. She didn't try to catch anyone's eyes. She let the room do its work on itself. Her stillness made room for the work. The property manager asked if I wished to add anything to the report. I slid the email back across the table and asked that the subject line be referenced exactly. He read it, nodded, and asked Tina to include the phrase assignment confirmed and decal delivered and unexpired. She wrote it as he said it, each word settling like a tile into grout. He asked if I wanted to include a note about the lane conditions for context. I said yes, the line of cars, the red light steady, the rerouting. He repeated it as she wrote it. The page filled without becoming full. He turned back to the screen and advanced the clip one more second so that my bumper passed beneath the camera's fixed gaze. The gate arm moved like a limb, slowly remembering its range. He let the motion end and then muted the screen to a still. He spoke the conclusion in a voice that was neither triumph nor apology. The secondary verification was not warranted under policy as applied to the resident's valid decal, given the misaligned time indicator on the camera system and the confirmation in the license plate reader log. He said the sentence twice, the second time shorter, and then told Tina to read it back for the minutes. She did. No tremble, no haste.
The attendant's shoulders changed shape and loosened. He looked at the floor and then at me and said he would be in the training. He didn't add anything after that. He did not try to sand the corners of his words. He let the corners be honest. The supervisor said he would revise the overnight briefing to reflect tonight's sequence and would remain on site to ensure the gate lane returned to standard flow with the south lane unburdened. The property manager told him to go ahead and make that call. He stepped into the hall and spoke into his radio with a new tone, less like hiding and more like a person doing a job. The property manager stayed with us and asked for one last confirmation. Did the report reflect the photo evidence, the time sources, the log, the clause, the actions to be taken, and the acknowledgement? Tina answered yes, and he initialed the front page.
He turned the remote so the screen dimmed and then went black, and the projector's fan wound down to a softer breath. The hush that followed wasn't the hush of waiting. It was the kind rooms make when the air fits again. He turned to me then, only to me, and said he regretted the hold at the gate and the way the process had handled me. He did not use the word inconvenience. He used the words handled me, and they fell exactly where they should. He said the board expects the procedure to protect residents as much as property, and that tonight the procedure would be adjusted to do that job more faithfully. He asked if I wanted a copy of the full packet. I said yes, and Tina slid the warm stack into a clear sleeve and handed it to me like it was not paper, but a small, intact machine. Sam checked the network status once more on the supervisor's tablet and nodded to no one. He caught my eye and tipped his chin the way men do when they've watched the same river and decided to keep showing up with tools. Maya slid the printed photo into the sleeve behind the report and then pressed the folder shut with her palm, smoothing the cover as if smoothing a bedspread before you turn out the light. The property manager opened the boardroom door, and the night re-entered as a smell. Jasmine, water dust, a little chlorinated air from the pool. It told the supervisor to release the secondary bay and return the light to green, and to note the time in the log. The supervisor's yes came clear and quick. We stood, the four of us, and the chairs moved with a sound like a small tide in a shallow cove. In the hallway, our footsteps were soft against the tired carpet. My knees held. My breath met me where I was instead of where I had been. Tina set the evidence sleeve in a folder stamped with the IR number and placed it into a fireproof drawer, then gave me my copy in a second sleeve marked resident. The sleeve squeaked as it slid against my folder. The sound was small and final in a way that did not pretend to be grand. We stepped into the office foyer. Through the glass, I could see the red light over the bay click to green. The gate arm rose and held. The lane looked different, the way places look different after someone dusts, even if nothing has moved. The attendant returned to the booth and met my eyes through the glass and held them. He didn't wave. He stood still. Sometimes still is the right word. Maya adjusted the strap on her backpack. She didn't ask if we were ready. She stood at my shoulder and waited for my left heel to move. I tucked the resident copy under the blue folder's flap and felt the layers settle into each other. Paper on paper has a sound like quiet applause if you have stood in enough rooms like this. We walked out together in the air that had cooled a degree. The smell of water dust had fallen to the ground and the jasmine had climbed to the fence. My car sat in the inspection rectangle, its paint catching a softer light than the one that had held it earlier. I opened the door and the interior carried the day's sun back to me, faint and comforting. The engine turned over with a low, even sound. The dash lights bloomed and then settled into their roles.
The property manager stood by the office door with his hands behind his back and watched the lane the way you watch a child sleep after a fever breaks. Sam gave a short lift of his fingers and vanished down the hall like a man who prefers the work to the witness. Tina returned to her desk and typed the last line into the report with the same care she had used to write the first. The supervisor's voice in the radio said the words "lane clear" in a tone that did not need to be believed to be true. I eased the car forward. The green at the bay held steady. The air at the threshold felt like a thin veil that knew its job. The tires hummed on the painted line and then found the smoothness beyond. The gate arm lifted without theater. In the side mirror, I saw the booth, the cone sit back upright, the monitor cycling the quiet grid. In the rear seat, in the reflection on the glass, I saw a small version of myself holding a blue folder, spine long, shoulders even, hands known to me. Maya set her phone face down in the cup holder like a small stone placed with intention. She looked at the totem clock as we passed and noted the time under her breath in a voice that did not need to be heard to matter. I steered toward the east wall, toward the number painted in white where my car has slept many nights.
The asphalt wore the day's heat down to a memory. The steering wheel felt like the edge of a well-made table, solid and kind. We pulled into the space. The tires made that gentle rubber whisper as they settled in the chalked angle. I shifted to park and let the engine idle for a breath before turning the key, the way my father taught me when metal liked to be thanked. The night climbed one more notch toward quiet. A neighbor walked a small dog along the hedge and lifted his chin, then lowered it, then kept going. He didn't know a story had just been put back into its right order next to his hedges. He didn't need to. I sat with my hands on the folder in the quiet around me the size of a room. Maya leaned her head back against the seat and looked at the ceiling fabric like people look at the sky in domed places built for listening. I thought of the porch and the glasses and the sound ice makes when it gives up and becomes water. I thought of my wife's fingers pinching a seam and flattening it under her nail, patient and exact. I thought of the words we carried into rooms and how the rooms had changed shape around them, not by force, but by being required to say their own names out loud. I turned the key. The engine hushed. The little tickling sound of hot parts meeting cooler air began a slow chorus somewhere under the hood. I set the folder in my lap and let my palm rest on it the way you rest a hand on a railing at the top of stairs. The air smelled like the last of the sprinkler spray on warm concrete. My heart, which had done so much counting tonight, counted slower now. Maya reached across and touched the folder once, light as a moth, then withdrew her hand. She looked at me without speaking. There are nights when silence is not an absence, but a roof. This was one. I lifted the resident copy enough to see the top page again. IR number, policy clause, offsets measured, plate log attached, a small square around the frame time, 2 staples like small guardrails, the letters of my name printed in the steady hand of a receptionist who knows where she is. The paper did not feel like a favor. It felt like what it was supposed to feel like, a record that would speak the same sentence tomorrow as it spoke tonight. I closed the folder and let it sit. The seat creaked a little under my shoulder. The dog's tags jingled once, then not again. Somewhere out by the gate, a car passed under the portico, and the arm lifted and lowered in the right time. I looked at Maya and saw my wife looking back from some long-ago porch where the night had also just decided to be kind. The line of my mouth found the shape it makes when a knot eases. The world outside the windshield held still long enough to be seen. A right is not a favor. If this meant something to you, like and subscribe, and in the comments, tell me your choice in a moment like this. See you soon.